What if Naruto has the Rinnegan?
An Umbu, quickly jumping from tree to tree, fast enough to be nothing more than a blur to untrained eyes, rushed to Nami no Kuni, the land of the waves. Are you? Former fellow Umbu. His face was obscured by a white porcelain mask with black tiger-like features and broad, blood-red stripes, identifying him as the Umbusi. Eyes, barely visible through the mask that obscured them, were a pale purple-gray color marred by a black rippling pattern of concentric circles, darting around. Systematically scanned the area. He was quite short in stature, with a lean, muscular figure, clad in standard Umbu gear. Long, almost mid-back length dark re. Behind him, tied on a low ponytail at the nape of his neck. He was the one of the youngest Umbu Black Ops ever, having been only a bit over 11 years old whe. 5 years ago. He was also known for having eliminated more enemy ninjas in the last 3 years than most Umbu do in their entire career. He was Naruto Uzumaki, and lesser-known son of the current Hokage and wielder of the legendary Dojutsu, the Rinnegan. Suddenly, Naruto stopped running, and allowed himself fall to the ground, landing silently on his feet. He had reached the place where Kakashi, formerly his Inu, had told him to meet him. He spotted the gravity-defying silver hair of his mentor up ahead, training the new genin team he was in charge of in the simp exercise, running up a tree. His Team 7, composed by Sasuke Uchiha, the last loyal Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, the pink Banshee, and a blonde girl by the name of Namikaze, the Hokage's daughter, Kuwabi's Jinchuriki, and Naruto's younger sister. Sakura had already completed the exercise, but the other two, due to their chakra reserves, were having some troubles achieving the same. Naruto watched his sister repeatedly fall to the ground, landing painfully on her ass every time. Trouble stopping himself from chuckling. Her stubbornness even in failure was quite a contrast from her typically arrogant, snobbish behavior. It was almost a downright foul language. Soon, not wanting to scare his older ex-partner, he made himself known, coughing into his hand quietly, but still loud enough to be heard. Team 7 and his sens quickly turned around, kunao in hand, ready to deflect any attack or confront an opponent, before Kakashi relaxed, already recognizing the Umbu's chakra sign. Alike. Ha, Tora-san, just in time, Kakashi said with an eye smile, making his cute little genin relax a bit. I hope I didn't call you in bad time, my friend. No problem, Kakashi-senpai. Actually, I was having the most boring week, Naruto said, smiling softly behind his mask, before quietly almost whining wee. Assassination missions. That was something entirely unheard of. Kakashi's single visible eye widened in shock. Never before had the Umbu, a band of infiltration specialized ninja, had been out of assassination missions. And that meant only one thing. Tora. Have you been doing multiple missions a week again? Kakashi asked rather sternly. The scene seemed more like that of a father scolding to his son. Tha. Student. Tora ran his fingers through his hair in embracement, as he quietly sweat dropped. Team 7 stared at the weird scene. Ah, right. Team 7, this is Tora-san. Umbu Black Ops. Tora-san, these are Sasuke Uchiha, Mito Uzumaki Namikaze, and Sakura Haruno. Sasuke couldn't help but feel that he had heard that name before. Tora, where have I heard that name before? Sakura, however, did remember where she came. Tora? As in the Ure Tora, one of the best Umbu of Konoha. Mito's chin dropped. Sasuke assumed a look that was a mix of annoyance and mild interest. Tur. The fangirl. Tora, however, completely ignored her, and instead focused on the snobbish genin that so greatly resembled his old partner, dear friend, and teammate Huan. Mask, both in appearance and, to a lesser extent, in presence, but would never have the same devotion and selflessness. Itachi, better known as Itachi Uchiha. Must have thought it hilarious to have his codename be the same as his name, would be quite sad if he were to know that Sasuke was becoming more an M. His clan, so focused on hatred and his clan superiority that he refused to see anyone as his equal. "So, you're Sasuke, huh?" Tora asked as he walked a bit closer to the genin, circling him once like the feline his codename identified him as, freaking him out, eh? "Really do look like him," he added quietly with a smile, reminiscing on the past. "I'm nothing like him," Sasuke yelled, outraged, bringing the Umbu back to reality instantly with a very well-hidden flinch. Both of Konoichi stared incomplete at the violent reaction from their normally composed teammate. Kakashi was looking at Sasuke with both sadness and anger in his single visible eye, before his head disapprovingly. He was previously so sure he'd been able to get him to realize he couldn't focus his life on revenge, but now he clearly saw that slightest mention of attack made Sasuke lose all sense of logic. "He was my teammate and a good friend for years before the incident," the young Umbu said, his voice now cold and emotionless, releasing enough killing int. "Freeze the genins in fear. You're right, you are nothing like him. You rather remind me greatly of the elders of your clan," he claimed, not bothering to mention disgust towards the Uchiha elders, "and you have way too much hate in you to be like him," he added mentally as he began calming down. "Kakashi-senpai, you temper, or someone's going to off the kid sooner rather than later," he said in a cold, mildly threatening tone, turning his masked face to the former Capitan. Kakashi smirked under his face mask, pulling out his little orange book from his back pocket and opening it where he had left off previously, before Tora appeared. "Actually, do you mind taking over their training today? You know, teach them chakra control and stuff like that." The Jonin asked. "I think they'd really benefit." "Tora-san." "Sorry Kakashi-senpai, I don't babysit," Naruto answered, annoyed. His eye twitched under his mask, and he was trying hard to keep himself from burning the ash. The lazy pervert dared to chuckle amusedly, behind his porn. That last sentence enraged Mito. Her long, flowing hair parted into 9 sections, and floated menacingly behind her, like the Kuwabi's deadly tails, in a perfect time. When angry. "Shut up, Baka. I'm not a baby. I'm the Hokage's daughter. I deserve your respect," she yelled, her face rivaling her mother's hair in color. Angrier at the Umbu, but wisely kept his mouth shut. "Respect is earned, and right now, you have yet to give me any reason to respect for any of you, and all the reasons to dislike you," he said coldly, trying hard. Disappointment showed in his voice. It disgusted him that their parents and village alike had spoiled her so much that she considered herself superior to everyone. Little girl that, if a bit of a brat at times, was gutsy, honest and kind to everyone, his little sister that he cherished above everyone else and had been proud to. He now barely recognized the spoiled rotten princess that replaced her. She had come to rely on the demonic chakra of the beast sealed inside her too much. She never had learned to control her own, and mostly just overpowered every jutsu in her small, overused arsenal. Sasuke fumed angrily, glaring at the Umbu with so much hatred that Kakashi discreetly peeked behind Naruto just to check if Itachi wasn't somehow lurking. Opened his mouth to join Mito in her rant, but Tora just angled his mask towards him, and, for some reason, he felt scared enough that he opted to keep his on, just snarling quietly. Sakura, unlike her teammates, opted to not antagonize the deadly ninja and just accepted his insult quietly, turning all her anger towards the insult to her SAS. And trying hard not to let it show on her face. The Umbu was her superior and much stronger than her, and it was generally a bad idea to piss him off. Besides, that made her very hesitant to anger him in any way. Naruto noticed this, and his lips twitched up into a small smile behind his mask. Maybe she wasn't as us thought her to be. Tora turned to look at Kakashi, with a smirk audible on his voice. The pinky there, however, has very good chakra control. I suppose it wouldn't hurt to teach. Have you considered apprenticing her to a medicnin? He said, turning his head to look at the Konoichi. Sakura looked very surprised, and blushed at the prey. Down to hide her smile from her teammates, Kakashi nodded in agreement with an eye smile. Of course, but I wanted to increase the size of her reserves first. Mito and Suzuki stared disbelievingly, darting rapidly between Sakura, Kakashi, and the Umbu. The useless fangirl had been picked over them. To be taught be only be a joke. Tora was probably too young to know what he was doing. Then their disbelief turned to envy. She was going to learn from a Konoha Umbu, and at that, why was she chosen when they weren't? Kakashi nodded his thanks to his old student, choosing to save the stern talking to he knew he'd have to have with the other two genin for later, rather than and himself, further in front of his cute little koi. What do you say, Sakura? Do you want to learn a few things from Tora-san? He asked. Well, if you don't mind, sensei. She answered, blushing all the way up to her ears. Kakashi I smiled. Not at all, Sakura. Tora-san is one of the best people to teach you, other than a medicnin. He turned his face away from his genin to Lu. Has impeccable chakra control, especially for someone with reserves as massive as his are, and he knows quite a few techniques that really benefit from good. Explained to the girl. Besides, he was my very first student, he added, his eye glinting with pride. Mito, still fuming, opened her mouth to complain further. A very small sliver of chakra began slowly oozing out from the Umbu, coiling around him tightly as he amounts of killing intent, not enough for his little genin to pick out as anything other than a slight chill, but just enough to warn Kakashi that, unless he'd learn the harsh lesson of the sheer difference in power between them and this particular Umbu, by means of suddenly finding themselves on a gigantic crater forest before it was leveled in a second's time, mostly unharmed but properly traumatized. It was probably a good idea to step in and defuse the situation. Q. Leveled Mito with a glare that promised pain if she didn't close her mouth immediately. Her jaw clacked shut loudly, her teeth nearly hitting her tongue as she flushed up in anger. Hints of demonic chakra were visible in her, more feral than normal. Sharp canine teeth, long nails that resembled claws, the darkening of whisker-like marks, 2 on each of her cheeks, as opposed to her older brother's 3. Much thinner and lighter, something that she greatly envied, and blood-red eyes with slit pupils. The 2 older ninjas ignored her, strangely too used to the Fey chakra to be bothered. Let's go inside, Tora-san. We still have much to discuss about this mission, Kakashi urged. The Umbu nodded agreeably, still on edge, before turning on his old captain and father figure. As they headed back to the house, Kakashi suddenly remembered something. Suzuki, Sakura, Mito, keep working on walking you. Cheekily. The anger of the 2 pissed-off genin suddenly turned to him, and the jounin had to suppress the urge to laugh evilly. Once they were inside the house, the 2 older ninja made themselves comfortable, sitting across from each other on the wooden floor, as Kakashi gave him a situation up until now. So, the demon brothers and Zabuza Mamakai, the demon of the mist, huh? Tora said contemplatively. This guy Gato must some serious money, to afford th. Slowly in agreement. Plus, there's an unknown hunter nin allied with Zabuza. Uses Senbon with terrifying accuracy, and was able to fool me into thinking Zabuza was dead for AW. Added. Tora chuckled softly. You must be getting rusty then, Kakashi-senpai. Kakashi looked mildly offended for a second, but quickly came to chuckled in AGR. Anyways, I think the best course of action is to cut this problem at the root. I have reasons to believe this Gato guy is worse than you've reported. There's missing girls in this general area, including the daughter of a minor noble, Naruto explained. Kakashi's face twisted in disgust at what he was implying. I'll be fortress tomorrow and eliminating him. I might leave a hunged clone in his place, and see if I can find out who his allies are. The Jonin nodded in agreement with the plan. When you're done, we could use the help against Zabuza. Tora chuckled quietly as if I'd let you have all the foo. Soon, the sun began to set and Tsunami, the daughter of the bridge builder Tajuna, stepped in the room to call them for dinner. She did a double take upon masked ninja in the room, but relaxed when Kakashi I smiled and thanked her, reassured that he wasn't a threat. When all of the kids, the genin, as well as a frowning Inari, and Tajuna joined them on the dinner table, Kakashi took a brief moment to introduce the newcomer. Tajuna-san, Tsunami-san, this is Tora-san, from our village's Umbu division. He's an old student of mine, and he'll act as our backup after completing his own. Masked ninja bowed his head in greeting. Tajuna seemed to relax a bit, feeling that his safety was in more competent hands than just three brats and their teacher. He had heard of the reputation of Konoha's Umbu for being effective, even if this one seemed to be quite young. Umbu? Tsunami asked curiously, not sure what exactly it meant. Inari only frowned deeper, seemingly frustrated. A division of elite ninja that specialize in espionage, stealth and special assassinations. They are arguably the most powerful ninja in their village, after the Kakashi explained briefly. Tora nodded in agreement at the accurate description. Espionage and assassination, such a young boy. Tsunami mused. How old are you, Tora-san? She asked, giving Naruto a sorrowful look as she softly placed front of him, already having done the same to all the other guests. The Umbu thanked her, before answering, I can't tell you exactly, it's essential that very little is known about an Umbu, or we could be compromised, but I see. Only a few years older than Kakashi-senpai's genins, he explained respectfully. This shocked everyone in the room other than Kakashi, who, as his old captain, knew him personally. They weren't expecting him to be quite so young. Team 7 was the most uneasy, as it finally sank in that this teen, barely older than them, killer with a well-known reputation and probably had hundreds of kills to his name. The rest of the meal was spent in uncomfortable silence, with the Umbu having lifted his porcelain mask just enough to sneak his chopsticks into his mouth too. Kept discreetly trying to peek under his mask, like they'd once done to Kakashi, who was watching the whole ordeal with an air of amusement, and failing heavily, barely touching his food. Tsunami and her father kept exchanging looks of barely concealed sadness, both due to Inari's behavior and due to the young already being a killer. Once all of the ninja were finished eating, and Tsunami took away their plates, Kakashi quickly brought the genin up to speed on the plan. Listen close, my cut. The plan for tomorrow. We will all accompany Tajuna to the bridge, and if Zabuza does indeed appear, I will try to hold him while Mito and Suzuki fight off his A. Your job will be to protect Tajuna. I will leave a shadow clone here to protect Tsunami-san and Inari-kun, just in case. At the break of dawn, Tora-san will be his mission, but he should be back by lunchtime, and he'll meet us at the bridge. The copy ninja stated. Hi, Kakashi-sensei. Team 7 echoed. Tora just nodded in agreement. Finally losing his temper, Inari slammed his bowl on the table. Why, he shouted, why do you guys bother to try so hard? No matter how hard you train, you Gato's men. No matter what glorious claims you make or how hard you work, the weak will only end up getting killed. Everyone went quiet. Team 7 looked at the kid with anger and disgust clearly boiling in their eyes. His family looked saddened with his behavior while body language dramatically changed, turning from open and friendly to frigid and stiff. Surprisingly, Suzuki was the first to break and angrily respond to his insult. I refuse to die before killing a certain someone, he hissed out coldly, letting out enough killing intent to cause all of the civilians to shake in fear. I am not. Kakashi laid a hand on his shoulder to try and calm him down, but the last Uchiha shrugged it off and stormed away, going back to the forest to train, nearly t. hinges when he slammed the door behind him. The Jounin sighed, allowing his hand to drop to his lap. Inari, Tsunami, and Tajuna seemed shocked at the wrath. Suzuki's teammates were quite surprised by his explosion. Most of us ninja have all faced some sort of hardship in our lives, Kakashi explained, turning his eyes in the direction where his student had stormed off to, was witnessing the aftermath of the senseless massacre of his entire clan, of which he is one of only 2 survivors. He was only 6 years old at the time, and dead before his very eyes at the hands of someone he thought he knew. Tsunami and Tajuna gasped, and tears began softly flowing down the woman's cheeks. "The poor dear," she softly said, clutching a hand over her heart. Inari, however, stubbornly pushed away the heavy feeling of guilt that settled deep in his stomach and nearly caused him to choke up, and pressed further. "Simeon, then," he tried. Kakashi just shook his head. "The other survivor," he said quietly, but coldly, "was the monster who did it, his traitor of an older brother." All those unaware. Fact, at least for the younger generation, as it wasn't something anyone liked to talk about, which surprisingly included Mito as well as Sakura, could only with shock. Inari looked crushed at the mere thought of such thing, and he lowered his head in shame. Tora silently grinned his teeth together, mentally reminding himself that only he, the Sandaime and, of course, Itachi himself knew the truth of what had truly. He carefully forced himself to calm down, hoping Kakashi was too distracted with his memories to notice the slight changes in his body language. Luckily Mito, the center of attention, chose this time to make itself known, stopping anyone from noticing him. "I have the Kyuubi sealed inside of me, and it's my duty to keep it from getting free and destroying everything," she said in a somewhat fake sad tone, clutching shirt just over the location of her seal. The 2 older civilians' heads shot up to look at her in a mix of awe and pity, Tsunami's tears flowing harder, expressing burden this little girl had to shoulder, all by herself. Inari looked confused, and asked a question almost in a whisper, "What's that?" Mito opened her mouth to answer, her nose already stuck up in the air as she glared down on the boy, as if offended he did not know such a thing, but Kakashi. With his answer, "The Kyuubi no Kitsune is a gigantic 9-tailed demon fox, the most powerful the Baijuyo. A single swing from one of its tails can easily level a mo." Explained briefly. The civilian child turned to look at Mito with an odd but very frightened, almost terrified look, and unconsciously moved back a step, as if to get away from the room in a near panic state. His family moved to stop him, but the door was slammed shut before they even had the chance to get up. Silence reigned for a few minutes, as the father and daughter duo looked on in sadness, barely concealing their disappointment, their heads bowed in shame. Tsunami was the first to recover, hesitantly turning to ask Kakashi a question. "Hey Take-san, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what about you?" Mito and curious, wanting to learn more about their mysterious sensei. Kakashi's face went cold, and the air inside the house got heavy and almost stifling. Tora moved his old captain's shoulder, kneading the muscles there softly, trying to calm him down. Just as she was about to take back her question and apologize, the Jonin sighed, and began speaking. "Unfortunately, I lost both my teammates during the war. We were only a bit younger than my team is right now," Kakashi said, seemingly lost in memories. Tajuna flinched, remembering the war well, but imagine a group of such young kids having to fight in it. "Obito died saving us from an enemy trap we got caught in. Rin was later kidnapped by the enemy and turned into a weapon against the Leaf. In the end, my hands rather than be used against the village, and jumped in front of one of my attacks," he admitted quietly, shaking nearly imperceptibly. Tora's gripped his shoulder, grounding him back to the present, earning him a brief thankful glance, as Kakashi took a deep breath and pulled himself together. Trying to clear his mind, the Jonin pulled out his little orange book from one of his kunao pouch. For once, Toro let it slid, repressing his loathing of the disgusting senpai with the knowledge he was using it as a distraction from his own thoughts and the guilt he felt over his teammates' deaths. Mito and Sakura quickly left, with much to think about in their minds and bothered by the ruined mood. No one really seemed to notice or care, all too focused. Thoughts? Soon however, the awkward, heavy vibe in the room began to ease, as Kakashi's mood began to lift and life resumed. A good helping of sake curtsy of the bee. This, although Tora politely refused, giving his already filled cup to Kakashi, which he accepted with an eye smile and seemed to make his evening, sipping it a book. Tajuna recognized the masterpiece as a newly released Ika Violence, and scooted over closer to try and read it over Kakashi's shoulder, blood trickling. Nostrils. Under his mask, one of Naruto's eyebrows twitched violently, and he began exuding cold waves of killing intent that transmitted pure annoyance. Kak. Perverted giggle, but pulled the book closer to himself as if to protect it from his possibly violent kawaii. Pervert Tora muttered in exasperation under his breath, while narrowing his eyes in a glare to the book, wishing it spontaneously caught fire. The scarecrow. Gasping in shock, Tora-chan, how could you accuse your lovely, virtuous senpai of such vile thing, he asked, despite the erotic novel he still held, cracked open. You are about as virtuous as Jiraiya the Umbu deadpanned, but Kakashi seemed to just ignore him, returning to his dramatic whining, which seemed to only fond but still terrifyingly intense glare that would kill lesser ninja, or at least cause them to wet themselves. Playfully, Kakashi brought a hand to his heart and fell over, acting mortally wounded. I have only one last request, my lovely kawaii, he said dramatically. Take. Pass them on the next generation, don't let the way of the cool guy die with me, he said loudly, reaching dramatically for his student before dying on the floor. Sweat dropped. Tora's eyebrow twitched violently. Despite still wearing his ceramic mask, he couldn't resist the urge to introduce his face to the table with a loud thunk. Surprisingly well, remaining completely crack-free, thanks to a fortification seal he had placed on the inside years ago, after breaking a grand total of 6 mask-eye sparring, during his first year in the Umbu. Suddenly, a truly evil idea popped up on his mind as he remembered something, and he had to stifle a villainous laugh, which seemed to mildly freak out Kaka. Senpai. What a shame you aren't a fan, because I got my hands on this and was going to give it to you, he said, as he discreetly reached for one of his seal. Unsealed a book from it, holding it out in front of Kakashi. Sunlight seemed to hit the book just right, making it seem like it was glowing golden. The scarecrow. Single visible eye widened to comic proportions. "Eye is that?" he asked in disbelief. Still staring at the gift from the gods in his student's unappreciative hands. Tora smirked, and it stretched to a degree that was quite unnerving if you mean the only copy in existence of the unreleased Ika harem, signed by Th. Then yes. But since you're not a pervert. Kakashi dug for it, but Tora simply moved the book so that it was just out of his reach, continuing with his taunts. Have to give it to Hiruzen. Then this earned him an utterly pitiful whine from Kakashi, who tried to snatch the book from him, again. Naruto chuckled, pulling away. Come on, senpai, you're not a pervert, right? He asked in an exceedingly sweet tone. Why would someone who's not a pervert want something like this? He opened his manipulation tool for a brief second. He stubbornly hid the slight gag caused by such disgusting excuse of literature, wishing, for once, that his eyes inhumanly sharp as they were, the contents of the 2 pages his eyes had landed on were already engraved on his brain and made him want to go and ask pretty please take that memory away. Kakashi went stone still, sweating nervously as his eyes darted back and forth between the book and his student. Tora smirked, waving the book around slight. All right. I admit it, I'm a pervert. Now gimme, the Jonin said quickly, nearly tackling the Umbu to the ground as he tried to snatch the book. Toro laughed heavy. Of the way, throwing the book up in the air. Kakashi jumped to catch it, cradling it like it was his firstborn. The maniacal laughter from his student made the ex-Umbu captain freeze up like a deer in the headlights, and curse violently when the younger man reached pouch and pulled out a recording device from behind his back. Nico and Owakami are gonna love this, he said with a strange glint in his eyes. Don't you dare. With a low growl and a narrowed glare. Before the scarecrow even had the time to wrestle the compromising tape away from Tora, the red-headed Umbu had already smacked his palm into the ground. With a hurried cookie-yos. With a poof of white smoke, a metallic green hummingbird with a tiny, black metal rod that pierced its chest appeared before him. Nearly unnoticeable due to its small size. Without so much as a command, a benefit of being a Rinnegan summon, the little bird, whose wings flapped so fast and made it seem like it was hovering, zipped to the recording device and grabbed the tape in its almost disproportional, surprisingly eagle-like talons, and cue. A slightly cracked open window, carrying the tape with surprising ease and elegance, for something that was almost the same size as the bird itself. Kakashi stared. Somehow, he already knew he'd be Umbu's laughing stock for weeks. Toro was still having fits of maniacal giggling, splayed out on the ground. Wondered if anyone would blame him for throttling the little asshole. Konoha, 2 a.m. The village hidden in the leaves was, for once, peaceful and miraculously quiet. Everyone was asleep, other than a couple Umbu squads unchanged arged with Putro. The village. The fourth Hokage and his beloved wife were also sleeping, after a long day of dealing with the worst nightmare of any cage, the only beast they had. Paperwork. Luckily, he had help in the form of his predecessor, the third Hokage, who was currently his advisor and very experienced in dealing in the matters of. Even allowed Minato to relegate some of his duties to him. The Yellow Flash was more than glad to allow the old workaholic to deal with the clan demands and everything to do with the Umbu for him, saving himself from the utter madness that were the politics revolving around either of those. But paperwork was some Sandame absolutely refused to deal with, claiming he was officially relieved from its clutches, laughing almost evilly. But for now, the nightmare was over, at L. Yondaime sighed happily in his sleep, enjoying the peace and quiet, in his fluffy bed, with his head resting on his favorite pillow that was just right, next to Hai Kusina. Yep, peace and Minato's lovely thoughts of peace and a world devoid of all paperwork were quickly shattered by a cacophony of hysterical, somewhat deranged laughter, the even terrify that old snake, Orochimaru, coming from the Umbu Black Ops hidden headquarters. How the laughter managed to echo all the way across the six. The Namikaze compound, the Hokage did not know, but it probably managed to wake up most of not the entire village. In quick succession, lights began being Konoha, as a collective thought sounded on the minds of all of its inhabitants. What in Kami's name are they doing this time? To other villages, the Umbu of Konoha were known for their incredible stealth and sheer power. But anyone that lived in the village for more than a few years later, that they were a bit of a mad bunch. A mad bunch that, amongst many other notable examples, enjoyed having what they called comedy nights with tea and interrogation personnel, every so often. The less anyone thought about that the better, for their own sanity's sake, and well known for its members' genera, habits and personalities, or absolute lack thereof, in some cases. The laughter eased soon enough, and the village collectively went back to sleep with only a few grumbling complaints. The Yondaime sighed in relief, glad that dealt with all those somewhat deranged ninja on a daily basis, beyond the four that served as his protection in his office, and those were always incredibly cute. Again, he also had to deal with some very eccentric ninja too. Just thinking of Mato Guy and his mini-me coming in for a mission usually made him want to There. With a nod, more to himself than anyone else, Minato decided to collectively send all the Umbu to therapy. A few of the things he had come to hear from Kaka. Quite sure that there was not a single, entirely sane person in the entire bunch. One of the more frequently mentioned by his old student was the mysterious T. Appointed by the Sandaime a few months after the birth of his successor's youngest son, and well known for being arguably the most promising Umbu since K. Usually gentle if somewhat boisterous demeanor and propensity for mood swings. He was known for being one of their best infiltrators and an expert in recon. Thus earned the nickname of Konoha's Uratora and an impressive bounty on the bingo book, based almost entirely on hearsay, a true testament to his SK. That were frequently mentioned were Nico and Oakame, usually in the form of a whined complaint about how the duo tended join forces with Tora to bully Kak. Usagi and Kuma, to a lesser extent. With a mental promise to budget more funds for Sarutobi to use on the therapy he was sure the Umbu needed, Minato dozed back to sleep, lulled by his wife's and the distant, soft snores of his 6-year-old son, Menma. Nami. Next morning. Tora was peacefully sleeping on top of the highest branch of a random tall tree, his mask still on, but, realizing the sun was about to rise and that he should start his mission, he got up, brushed any dust from his outfit, and simply jumped, slowly gliding down to the ground and settling on his feet, thanks to his ability. That was one of the many reasons he loved his Rinnegan. It made dramatic entrances very easy. After stretching a bit to work out all the kinks on his muscles from sleeping on a tree, Tora took off in a blink of an eye, rushing to track down his prey. Silent L more accurately, a ghost, he zipped about until he found a suspiciously nervous civilian that seemed very twitchy, and it took only a bit of convincing to get. Afterwards, he was then more than willing to lead him straight to the businessman's little hideout. With a carefully placed blow to the back of the head and placing a very well-hidden memory seal on the civilian, who'd wake up later with no memory of ever successfully infiltrated the mansion, weaving from shadow to shadow through corridors, carefully mapping out the location before he finally decided on a plan of. He made it to the very epic entree of Gato's empire, his luxurious master bedroom, passing past a few dozen fodder goons, although Kakashi would probably to call them bodyguards, without anyone being none the wiser. The security in this place was absolutely pitiful compared to many other places he'd had to in. His target was currently absent, probably taking his morning shower, he guessed from the pitter-patter of water he could hear nearby. Tora waited patiently, barren wall next to Gato's bed, until, only a few minutes later, the sound of the water stopped. Shortly afterwards, he heard the creak of a door opening and see his hand flying to his kunao pouch in preparation. By the door, was a short, fat man with a wet mane of brown hair, with only a towel warped around his loins. Had yet to notice his visitor, so Naruto decided to make himself known. "So, you're Gato, huh?" he asked quietly, looking over at Gato, who was quite startled by the presence of someone on his bedroom. He opened his mouth and something, suddenly finding himself tripping over his own words. The Umbu was uninterested to hear him, however, and just took out and threw a kunao that be into his head. "Honestly, your type disgusts me to the core," Naruto admitted to himself. Gato wavered once, shakenly bringing his hand to his head, before he then tipped over, dead. Tora allowed himself a small smirk, as he produced 2 shadow clones without any hand signs, blinking slowly to adjust to now being able to see through 2 of. Quickly recovered. The clones gave him shallow nod, as the original decapitated the corpse and sealed it in a scroll, and grabbed the headless body to dispose. Bunchan then assumed a henge, perfectly mimicking the now dead man, waving goodbye to the original as he disappeared in a soundless shunshin, leaving on ripple where he once stood, that quickly faded to nothing. Gato then proceeded to quietly locate all of his things he considered interesting and sealing them away in a single scroll, To claim later. Amongst these thing. Amount of wealth, several good quality weapons, quite a few papers of Gato's contacts and allies, just to name a few. Meanwhile, the other clone sneaked to locate and free the kidnapped girls. The pitiful, traumatized state in which he found most of them made all three Naruto's much more vicious when he eliminated Gato. Women of all ages, from girls as young as 12 or 13 to women that looked to be in their late 40, beaten severely, many stages of healing littering their bodies. Quite a few hung chained from the walls of the chamber that held them, while others were handcuffed to bed POS. Furniture. Most had signs of having been starved and raped, and were completely terrified of him at first. A quiet reassurance that he was here to free them, get them to hesitantly follow him out of the hideout, which seemed to give them a tiny bit of their confidence back. He slowly lead them all to a nearby village. Be the one from where the noble's daughter had disappeared from. The nobleman and his wife were more than glad to have their daughter back, quickly pulling for a tight hug and even offered to allow the other kidnapped girls to stay with them until they recovered and it became safe for them to go back to their family. Influence was gone. Once all the girls were safely away from their kidnappers, the clone simply allowed himself to dissipate. As the original tourist sprinted away, back to Tajuna's house where he and Team 7 were currently stationed, his mind wandered back to one of the goals he'd had. The day he unlocked his Rinnegan. He had noticed rather quickly that he could see through the eyes of his shadow clones, and that they all shared a field of vision. He often used this to his advantage. Fights and as advanced recon, which gave his team a massive advantage by letting him know where everyone was in real time, which gave him the idea of USI clones with this ability to watch over the village, almost like some sort of surveillance system. It didn't take him too long to come across a few problems, namely, the headache of epic proportions that he got the first time the clones he had placed all dispersed, almost at the same time, from running out of chakra. The Rinnegan had enormous chakra requirements, and clones, who were incapable of regen, couldn't handle it for more than a few hours. Blood clones had a very similar problem, and, although a bit sturdier than shadow clones, they were still much too flimsy. A bit after this failure, he'd had the permanent solution, which was only further encouraged when he found a hidden scroll in one of Orochimaru's old spots, containing a certain forbidden technique. Kukiyos, Edo Tensei, which allowed one to bring someone back to life, and made the reanimated person near indestructible, with pretty much infinite cha. At first, he thought this would be the perfect solution, allowing him to both see and fight any intruders, but when he went to see how the technique was changed his mind, having damn near thrown up in his mouth a little. Still, he was an umbu and he couldn't allow himself to be picky, so he memorized the tech. Thinking that maybe it could come in handy later, before burning the scroll. Still somewhat stuck on the idea of using corpses, he was quite happy when a few months later he discovered a brand new ability of his Rinnegan that allowed. By using the black chakra metal rods he could form easily from his palms and stabbing them on a dead body, a small animal, in this case, and forcing his control it with just a thought, almost like some sort of flesh puppet, which was mildly disturbing, but he'd take it over Edo Tensei any day. It was not too long after that he stumbled across another Rinnegan ability during a long solo mission. He had been trying to simply push his chakra into a corpse, without using his chakra metal trick, merely out of curiosity, when he began feeling distant, and like he was half asleep, no longer entirely aware of all too familiar feeling. His mouth moved on his own, and he distantly heard himself say Gadu, Rin Tensei no Jutsu. He snapped awake immediately after. To watch in complete disbelief as the rabbit corpse he had been experimenting on, and was supposed to become his dinner later, suddenly jerked awake like asleep, looked around, and took off deeper into the woods. He felt utterly exhausted, completely drained, and a while later he noticed that his dark red hair Slight washed out shade of red from overexertion, a sign that the jutsu had actually drained enough chakra to slightly affect his life force, and would have were he not a Uzumaki, who were known for having incredibly strong life forces. It took him a soldier pill and several hours of meditation before his own res slowly began to return to a somewhat normal level, and a few days before he recovered enough that his hair returned to his normal blood red color. He still wasn't quite sure exactly how to create his Rinnegan surveillance system, but he had a feeling he was very close to achieving it, in a perfect balance of. As the first ability was way too dependent on him and his chakra, and the second was entirely too dangerous, unpredictable, and could possibly kill him. Not too long later, he finally reached Tajuna's house, landing silently on the forest behind it as he shoved his thoughts to the back of his mind. It took him that there was no one still alive nearby, easily recognizing that not only was it too quiet, but there were no chakra signatures visible to his eyes. However, the chakra residue in the air to tell him a fight had taken place here only a while ago. He easily recognized the chakra signature of Kakashi, along with two unknown. Very little residue, leading him to believe his opponents had small chakra reserves, perhaps Chunin or even Genin level, so he wasn't too worried for Kakashi's. Into the inside of the house confirmed his suspicions, finding disturbances typical of a fight having taken place and blood splatter on the floor and walls, but corpse. After a quick but thorough look over the house, finding no corpses anywhere on the house that might indicate that its inhabitants had died in the attic. A nearby tree caught his eye as he was preparing to leave the premises. Ninja thread was wound twice around the bottom of its trunk, nearly invisible to Enio. And above it was a series of fresh notches engraved in the bark, in a familiar pattern. It was a typical Umbu code, obviously engraved by his old captain, with message and a clear meaning, simple stating meet me at the agreed location. Without further hesitance, Tora shot off towards the bridge at breakneck speeds, already preparing for a fight. His hand fell back to the handle of the tanto, that was strapped horizontally across his lower back, although he refrained from drawing it just yet. As he approached the bridge, Tora took note of the thick, chakra-infused mist covered the entire area, becoming denser and denser as he rushed towards the. Hard to see anything all around him, an obvious sign of the Kirigakure no Jutsu. Even his Rinnegan, which gave him to have a much sharper eyesight than any. Well as the ability to see chakra, couldn't pierce through the mist further than a few feet, but that, combined with his sensory abilities, was more than enough FO. He allowed himself to slow down a bit as he got closer to where he could feel Kakashi's chakra, focusing on sneaking in unnoticed. He could feel the battle's ALR, but opted to quickly stake out the situation before engaging any opponents. He silently made 3 cage bunchin, adding 3 new fields of vision to his perspective. Seamlessly forced himself to adjust to, and had them position themselves on various hidden vantage points around the area, to cover his blind spots. Kakashi, decking it out nearby, and seemed pretty well matched, so Tora turned to the other fight. Mito and Suzuki were battling Zabuza's apprentice. The fake hunter managed to drag the fight quite a bit away from the Jonins, in what seemed to be a dome made of half-destroyed ice mirrors. Briefly, the Umbu wondered if Hayatan user, but he had previously believed they had been whipped out. But, looking closer at the sheer perfection in its chakra build, he wondered if perhaps to somehow survive the 4th Misukage's bloodline purges, admiring its ideal balance between the 2 chakra natures. Tora discreetly sneaked into the dome, just in time to see Mito, covered in an all too familiar coat of malevolent orange chakra, 2 tails flicking dangerously loudly as she prepared to finish off the hunter nin, her eyes animalistic and blazing red, clearly being influenced by the Kuwabai. Suzuki was unconscious beneath his body, stabbed with dozens of senbon, in a false death state. The gender-ambiguous ninja was already badly hurt, their skin covered in severe burns caused chakra of the Kuwabai, and nearly unconscious, almost dead due to a fist-sized puncture wound to his abdomen, held tightly by the neck by a hand tipped with claws that slashed into it shallowly and drew a bit of blood that seemed to boil in the hate-filled orange chakra. The Jinchuriki quickly noticed his presence, and jumped back, putting some distance between them, growling in anger at the interruption. Without anyone to half-dead fake hunter Nin, barely clinging to consciousness, tipped forward like a puppet cut from its strings, crumbling down to the ground, but before his the dirt, the Umbu was already behind Mito, laying a swift chop on the back of the neck that knocked her out instantly. He caught her before she could fall, against his chest, watching carefully as the red chakra recede back into the seal until it was completely gone. Then he crouched down, carefully laying his cyst, and brushed a straggling strand of her hair away from her face in a silent apology. Suddenly, there was a dramatic shift in the chakra balance of the area, the familiar smell of ozone and the feel of electricity in the air. Kakashi was done play. About to finish off Zabuza with one of his assassination techniques. The lack of the characteristical chirping screech told him it wasn't a Chidori, but probably it. The Raikiri. Tora just turned his head slightly to that location, not really feeling the need to interfere. But at the very last second, something caught his eye. The hunter Nin, whom he previously thought would be dead or close to it, began fidgeting, desperately. Onto his feet, his eyes gleaming with steely determination. Naruto could barely hear him as he whispered something to himself. I have to save Zabuza. Miraculously, the young ninja actually managed to steady himself up, and take a couple of steps forwards, out of sheer determination. He tried to keep going. Nearly lost conscience, tripping over his own feet, and would have fallen were it not for the Konoha Umbu suddenly appearing besides his to steady him, slinging of the dying Nin over his shoulders for better leverage. Why do you want to save him? Naruto asked quietly, his Rinnegan meeting the quickly dulling black orbs of the mercenary, indulging him as he began moving. The ice user smiled, even as blood began spilling out of his mouth, and managed to choke out because, he's important to me, he has saved me when I. That somehow tugged on Tora's heartstrings, despite not knowing the boy at all. All right, then he whispered to himself, shifting around slightly so that the around until he was solidly on his back, before picking up some speed, even as he had two of his clones pick up Mito and, after stabilizing him, Suzuki, and Ta. House. They were quickly approaching the area where Zabuza and Kakashi were fighting, from the area while the hunter Nin had managed to drag the two genin of two over his shoulder, feeling his temporary companion and charge did not have much time left. What's your name, kid? The response was so low that the Umbu had a hard time hearing it, but he still caught that whispered name. It's Haku, what's yours, he said weakly. Onto his now blood-stained Umbu gear. I'm Tora, he said automatically, before hesitantly adding, but you can call me Naruto on instinct alone. Haku chuckled softly, but it quickly faded to silence. Going limp. The Umbu could feel the cooling blood beginning to seep through his own clothes. With a quiet curse, he sped up further, already spotting Kakashi only a few meters away from his target, Raikiri blade bathing his surroundings eerily in light beam. Zabuza was seriously wounded, both his arms rendered useless by Kunao while Kakashi's Ninken held him in place. Just as the missing Nin was about to be impaled by the blow, Tora suddenly appeared beside Kakashi with a shunshin and caught his attacking arm by the ring. Scrapped Zabuza's chest, instantly bringing the blow to a complete halt. Haku's dulled eyes landed on his master, and the corners of his lips tweaked up into a smile. Both Kakashi and Zabuza's eyes widened at the sudden interference, with the missing Nin taking one look at the Umbu and cursing under his breath, Stu. His injuries and the sudden disappearance of the hounds that had pinned him in place. Enough, Kakashi. Your opponent is already defeated, he said quietly, ignoring the look that his senpai gave him. Gently, he got Haku off his back and laid him Noting that he was still alive, if barely. The missing nin watched with an undecipherable expression, that seemed to somehow soften when he locked eyes with companion, whose smile did not falter despite his imminent end. "You raised a fine shinobi," Tora said quietly to the missing nin. Even nearly dead, he got up to his feet and was prepared to take that blow for you. "You really?" "Him." The ex-member of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist said nothing, but even Haku's eyesight, despite it quickly going dark from the blood loss, could see and wanted to tell him but couldn't. "You've done well. I'm proud of you." His smile turned nearly blinding despite the blood running down his lips, and he finally let to succumb to the blood loss and pass away. Zabuza closed his eyes for a second, a tear streaking down his face as mentally apologizing to him for not having him and wishing him a better afterlife. "Besides, Zabuza-san, your paycheck." Tora continued, dragging the morning ninja's attention to him, just as Gato and a large crowd of his thugs strutted, armed to the teeth and faces set on mocking grins, as if on cue. It totally was. Some of the goons began mocking Demon of the Bloody Mist. "I don't think you could even scare a kitten. So the girly one died, huh? Shame, I'd like to have out of him," another said lecherously. His companions chuckled in agreement. "Yes, he'd have made an excellent boy toy." Zabuza full-on growled, a rather terrifying sound. But his gut told him to pay attention to the red-haired Konoha Umbu that was now besides him, noticing his sentence. With a rather nasty smirk but an otherwise nearly flat voice, Tora finished, "Is already dead," and with that, Gato smirked widely, decapitated one of his body. Sword that hadn't been there a second ago, and a loud hench dissolved right before the shocked eyes of the thugs around him, leaving a clone of the Umbu eye. Without a word, the clone dispelled, and Tora took a step back, turning his mask to look at the missing nin as he slowly unsheathed his tanto. "Would you like tea?" "Them, Zabuza-san." The ex-mist ninja gave him a savage grin. "Don't interfere. These guys are mine," he told the Umbu, who promptly resheathed his sword, asking him to borrow him a kunao. Tora complied, digging out one of his sharpest chakra metal kunao and flipped it in the air. The missing nin jumped, catching grip it by the handle with his sharpened teeth, the bandages that once hid the bottom half of Zabuza's face having already been torn apart. After briefly adjust balance on his teeth, and looking with surprise at the Umbu when he noticed the ridiculously high quality of the extremely chakra-conductive weapon, Huju's mask, and shrugged, Zabuza turned his eyes to the thugs on the bridge, freezing them in place with just a withering glare. What followed was nothing short of a massacre. Even with both his arms rendered unusable, the Demon of the Hidden Mist made do on his moniker by single. The thugs that had followed the false Gato to the bridge, shrugging off the multiple stab wounds and growing number of weapons that were beginning to pile you. Normally, no civilian, thug or not, would be able to touch, never mind injure the ex-member of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist, but severely wounded and secret death of his apprentice and adoptive child, he just couldn't bring himself to fully concentrate on the fight. Only once the bridge was bathed in the blood of the thugs, and all the ones that were still alive were ran off by the sudden arrival of the civilians of the wave. And done with their shit, thanks to the encouragement of young Inari, did Zabuza finally collapse to the ground from a mix of blood loss and exhaustion, both physical, dozens of weapons of all kinds piercing his back. Tora appeared next to him with a silent Shunshin, kneeling beside him. In nothing more than a whisper, a small mercy to try and save what remained of the Kirinin's pride, he quietly asked the quickly fading man if he had any loss. Equally as quiet tone. The mortally wounded man nearly begged the Umbu to bring him to Haku, to which he nodded in acceptance, as he dragged one of Zabu over the bloodied armor on shoulders and helped the much taller Nin cross the few feet toward the slowly cooling body of the Hayaton user. The missing Nin shoved him away and tried to move closer on his own, but ended up falling forwards with a quiet curse, adjusting his body so that he crashed then face first, coughing up some blood from the sudden impact to his punctured lungs that were quickly filling up with the life-giving fluid. Side by side with the young ninja he considered his child in all but blood, Zabuza finally allowed tears to run down his cheeks, gently caressing his cooling che. Admitting out loud for the first time, his pride on Haku and wishing to be besides him in death too, and asking him if they could go to the same afterlife, Tajet. Forward to Haku's forward protector in what could be seen as a comforting motion, Zabuza, the demon of the hidden mist, closed his eyes for the last time. Blood-stained lips even as death finally took him.